Greetings and salutations. I have a chair up here because one of the things that I want to do is just a quick breathing exercise. I want us to be able to open ourselves up a little bit. They told me I have to project, so I'm trying to remember that. To open ourselves up a little bit. And so what I wanted to do is be up here so you could mimic my movements. So I'm sitting with you. So if you would, if you're able, if you're willing and able, if you take one hand and put it over your heart, one hand over your heart. And if you're willing and able, take the other hand, it doesn't matter which, and put it over your abdomen. And just take a deep breath. That was good. This time, try to take a deep breath like somebody is not sitting on a stage telling you to take a deep breath. Do the best that you can. Okay, begin to bring just a little bit of movement into your body if you would. Continue to keep your hand over your heart, your hand over your abdomen. A little bit of movement into your body, just wiggle just a little bit. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring ourselves into a little bit of a 45-degree angle while we're wiggling with our hand over our heart and our hand over our abdomen and pull ourselves back up into the upright. We're gonna do this a couple more times, just enough to make everybody feel real awkward. Pull yourself back up. One more time, lean at that 45-degree angle. All right, and pull yourself back up. Keep wiggling. Okay, you can stop. Your feet flat on the floor. Your hands on your knees, Meg the Stallion. Now take a deep, conscientious, intentional breath. Oh, that was so good. That was so good. Thank you so much. And you can do it again. You got to breathe anyway. So if you want to take another deep breath, you can do it again. But that felt so good. Thank you. I appreciate you participating with me in that. What I'm hoping is that you notice something different about that last breath. I'm hoping that you notice that while you are moving through this constant imbalance of movement and flow, that your breath has no choice but to become more conscientious the moment that it recognizes that you are still. You are still. We're going crazy, but you are still. So I wanted us to open up with a grounding exercise because I have a confession to make. And that is that what I hope to do today is to challenge the way that you see some things. And in order to do that, I need you to be grounded in something that is deeper than your ego, because it is your ego's job to protect you from new things. And that's fine, but your ego can't help you to see anything differently. So I needed you to be grounded in something deeper than the ego, so I reached for the one thing that I know to be deeper, and that is the self. And so I had you in here with your hands over your heart and your hand on your abdomen, had you take a deep breath, had you bring some movement and some awareness into your body, lean forward and lean back, and then put your feet flat on the floor and your hands on your knees, make the stallion, and take a deep, conscientious breath in. And I'm not your mama, but you're grounded in this moment right now. Right now, you are grounded with me. And I am so happy I couldn't ask for anything. I couldn't ask for anything more. The thing about breathing is that it is an organic part of living. Breathing is a very organic part of living. That inhale and that exhale is an organic part of living. That means that when our bodies are operating in what we would call ideal working order, what we've normalized as ideal working order, then our bodies should not have to fight with themselves in order to retrieve a breath. So then a hard breath, like a breath when you're nervous and you're trying to do a breathing exercise and those breaths are really shallow when you start, like I don't know right now, that breath is a hard breath. That's a forced breath. It's a breath that you fight with your body in order to take. But a deep breath is a surrendered breath. That's a breath that you surrender to the body in order to take. You surrender to the self to take a deep breath. So while you are with me for the rest of this time today, what I would like to ask you to do is to take up the full embodiment of your inhale and your exhale. Take up the full embodiment of your breath if you are able, if you are willing and you are able, because breathing is an exchange. Inhale, exhale is an exchange. And also healing is an exchange. You can't take in a new breath and hold an old one. You can't take in a new mentality and hold an old one. My name is Valisa. I'm 32 years old, and this TEDx began as a meditation. I had been reading a lot about herbalism, it's a hobby, and I read about these childhood trauma healing rituals that incorporated floral elements. And so this one particular process called for you to use daisies to adorn your favorite pictures of yourself when you were a child. And so I did that. I took some daisies, I decorated my favorite pictures of myself at about 3 or 4 years old. I put those up somewhere where I could see them. And then what was next, you had to meditate with them. You were ultimately building a shrine to your childhood self and meditating and communing with that person. That may not be your cup of tea, but it's my cup of Hennessy. So that's what I did. I went ahead and I meditated. I meditated with these pictures of my childhood self. And no sooner than I got into a good meditation pose did this question arise on the inside of me. what is missing in these pictures? What is missing in these pictures? These are pictures of myself at 3 or 4 years old, pictures that I had seen over and over again, pictures of myself that elicited the most self-fulfilling sense of love. Pictures I'd seen over and over again that I thought I had memorized every essence, every aspect of nuance of these pictures, and yet the question was arising, what is missing from these pictures? So I was shocked at the question, but I was even more shocked that my spirit had a very intuitively immediate answer that my mind had not been able to rationalize for 32 years. My mother. My mother is what was missing from these pictures. I have no pictures of myself as a baby being held by my mother. I have no pictures of myself as a baby being held by any woman in my family, ever. This is not my mom. This is my Aunt Mary, who is not my biological mother. And this is the only image that I have of a woman holding me. I'm the queen of awkward moments. I just want to let it be awkward in here.
That's all right, girl. That's all right.
When this is your reality, when you've never seen an image of yourself being held by a woman in your family, living feels like floating. I don't know how, and I don't know why. I reflect a sense of groundedness to people because every day it feels like there's no ground underneath me. Living feels like floating, and not in a light, fun, and airy way, but in a very dark and a very conscious way. I could not for the life of me create a sense of context around who I actually was. So what I did was I developed a subset of subconscious doctrines to help me make sense of what I felt. And here's what I felt. I am unloved. I am unseen. I am unwanted. I am unloved. I am unseen. I am unwanted. I'm unloved, I'm unseen, I'm unwanted. And the only thing that I want to tell you is that it doesn't have to be true for it to be subconscious. It's not the job of your subconscious mind to help you differentiate between what's true and false. The job of your subconscious mind is to exist beneath your conscious mind. I didn't want to share this story with you today. Did not. Seemed sacrilegious to tell. Did not want to share it. Looked for every way, debated and looked for every way that I could get around sharing this story with you because I am very, very committed to not wanting this to be true. So committed to not being grounded in this truth that I couldn't be grounded in the truth because you can't be grounded in the truth and resist the truth at the same time. But I didn't want this to be true, and I didn't want this story to be mine. So I resisted. The thing about this meditation and this shadow work is that I can never go back to who I was before I confronted this shadow. I can never go back to that power dynamic of that shadow. Right? The thing that says you are unloved, you are unhealed, you are unwanted. I can never fully allow that under-informed narrative to be a complete assessment of my identity ever again. And the cycles that I endured while navigating that unhealed narrative, the self-doubt, the fear, the insecurity, I can never see those things as a true reflection of myself ever again because what those things really are is a projection of my shadow. This is called the semantics of shadow work. And I call it that because I love semantics. I love semantics. Semantics is not definition. Definition is what the word means. It's not etymology. Etymology is where the word came from. But semantics is the science of what we mean when we say what we say. And do you know what I recognize is that a lot of people say that they want to be healed, but really what they want is to be untraumatized. A lot of people say that they want to be healed, but really what they want is to be who they were before they were traumatized. Let me alleviate a little bit of pressure for you and ruin your day at the same time. You can never be that. You can never be that. You can never be who you were before you were untraumatized, and that is not in any way, shape, form, or fashion what healing is about. Healing is not about being untraumatized. Healing does not reverse the trauma. It doesn't rewrite the trauma. And let me tell you, it damn sure doesn't ask you to pretend like your trauma does not exist. It does not ask you to go back and change or edit the script of your trauma. Healing is what gives you leverage to move forward without disdain for the truth. So what's the truth? The truth is that your shadow will never not exist. My shadow will never not exist. our shadows will never not exist. So the objective of our shadow work is not to eliminate the shadow. The objective of the shadow work is to develop a conscientious understanding of where the shadow ends and where the self begins. Where the shadow ends and where the true self begins. People who do not engage in their shadow work, societies that do not fully engage in their shadow work will never be able to create a hard and fast distinction between their shadows and themselves. Because shadow work is that part of the healing process that helps us to confront our most repressed and resisted truths. Our most repressed and resisted truths, not in an effort to make them untrue or even in an effort to make them less true, but in an effort to make ourselves more true, wholly true to ourselves. So how do you know when a person has done their shadow work? How do you know when a person has done their shadow work? That person will not be able to forget, or another word that I use for forget is unknow. That person will never be able to unknow these two things, where they are unhealed and why they are unhealed there. Where they are unhealed and why they are unhealed there. How do you know that a person has not done their shadow work? That person will do everything in their power to forget these two things, where they are unhealed and why they are unhealed there. Why is there power to that? Because when you know where you are unhealed and why you are unhealed, here's the thing, is that people project the trauma and the truth that they do not process. And so when you process where you are unhealed and why you are unhealed there, you have less to project. So societies and people who do not engage in that work, they never develop a hard and fast distinction between their shadows and themselves. The things about trauma that makes it so pervasive is that it doesn't need to be taught in historical context. History has to be taught. Trauma needs only to be acquired. Trauma does not have to be taught. Trauma doesn't need our permission to take up residence in our subconscious mind. Trauma is the history that we cannot unknow. 32 years, nobody ever taught me, nobody ever pointed out to me, Valisa, no pictures exist of you being held by a woman in your family. 32 years, nobody pointed that out. But I could feel the ramifications of my historical context even before I had the words to adequately express it. Nobody taught me that history, but I could feel the trauma. Healing did not make me untraumatized. It will not make me untraumatized. It is not the erasure of the trauma, but healing is the revelation of the truth. And how do we reveal the truth through healing? Through process, because we project whatever trauma and whatever truth we do not process. Now, I done stood up here and took up all your time talking about my trauma. Now I want to talk about you. I want to talk about both of us. I want to talk about all of us and our shared generational trauma, because I tell you, we all have a little bit of a mother wound. We actually share a mother wound. The thing about our society right now, highly politicized. I'm not talking about political parties. I'm not talking about one party versus another party or other parties. I'm not talking about how you vote. I'm talking about a highly politicized society. That means a society that needs everything to be immediately categorized. If it's good or bad, if it's right or wrong, we need to know right now. We need to immediately, if we like it or we don't like it, we have to immediately categorize it. Now, what does that do for us? It helps us to get around having to emotionally process anything, because we desensitize the way that we feel so that we can prioritize the way that we think. I want to tell you one more story about trauma in this city. I have lived in the city of Chattanooga for 5.5 years. 5.5 years I've lived in the city of Chattanooga. 5.5. I have only been called a nigger 2 times in my God-given life. In 32 years of living, I've only been called a nigger 2 times. And it's happened in the last 5.5 years. It's happened in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The first time that it happened, I was with another group of girls. There were 3 of us, and we were leaving a restaurant, and this man pulled up in a car next to us and said some things. We rejected his advances, and I say reject, but really we just didn't respond, and this prompted him to call us a bunch of niggers. Now, these girls had lived here longer, so they might have known, but I did not know where I was. My mind was blown. I had no idea. I did not know where I was. So you'll notice, I can't tell you the date. I know it happened in February of 2018, but I can't tell you the date because I didn't know where I was. The second time that it happened was July 24th, 2021. I was walking through the Fort Wood area, and there was a pickup truck that rode by me, and a person yelled out of the window, "Nigger." And that fight or flight, all of that stuff kicked in, all of those feelings, all of that overwhelming history that a black person understands about that word and what a person is communicating when they use it. All of that ran through my body, and then my mind said, but you know where we are. Let me show you where we are, because you might not know. Show of hands, how many of you know that in the state of Alabama, it was legal? There was a law that was put into place in 1833 that made it illegal for a white person to teach a freed black person or any black person how to read or write. Show of hands. Okay? Show of hands, how many of you know that in the state of Mississippi, after the Emancipation Proclamation, there was a law that was put in place that was for vagrants. And black people who were not employed were considered to be idle, and they could be charged with this vagrancy law. And that meant that it would be punishable by a fine or by jail time or by forced labor. Show of hands. Okay. Show of hands, in South Carolina, do you know that there was a law put in place that said that black people who were registered as anything other than a farmer or a servant had to pay a tax of over $100? Show of hands. Okay, let me ask you this one, because I'm getting ready to show you where we are. How many of you, when I stood up here and I said the word nigger, know what color a person is that is called a nigger? How many of you know what color a nigger is? You can show your hands. Yeah, okay. That's where we are. That's where we are. How do you know that? How do you understand the power dynamic? How is it that you are so oblivious to the history, but you are so consciously aware of the power dynamic, oblivious to the history of the trauma, but aware of the power dynamic of the trauma? Because when we don't teach the history of the trauma, then we preserve the power dynamic that bred the trauma in the first place. So when we do not allow ourselves the divine right to examine the ugly parts of our truth, when we do not allow ourselves the divine right to examine the ugly parts of our truth with confidence and clarity and consciousness, everything that we see will be a blur. When we do not allow ourselves to approach our shadow work with confidence and clarity, then everything that we see will be a blur. Denial is the highest form of a trauma response because it wrongly convinces us that we can heal a thing and simultaneously not be clear on what needs our healing. So we can, as a society, we can politicize the teaching of a traumatic history. We can illegalize the teaching of a traumatic history. We can call it un-American to teach a traumatic history, but what you cannot do is politicize the trauma, because trauma doesn't care about the history that you teach or don't teach. Trauma is the history that you cannot unknow. Thank you.